100 word shorthand dictation exercise number 10 start. There is, however, one recommendation of the press commission which seems to have been omitted when making the provisions of this bill. The commission had said that on the council representation must be given to the periodical press also, that is, the weeklies and others. I find that omission here. I feel that in our newspaper world, these periodicals, these monthlies, fortnightlies, and weeklies do play an important part, especially in molding public opinion and in the dissemination of knowledge. Therefore, I think that the recommendation of the Press Commission that some representation ought to be given to the periodical press also must be considered in this connection. It seems to have omitted here. That is what I have to say at this stage regarding the composition of the council. Next, I come to clause 14 of this bill, which is a very vital clause. I was happy to listen to the Honorable Minister when he stated that it is the accepted canon of journalistic conduct not to disclose the source of information. If you go through the history of journalism in India, you will find that our top men in the newspaper world had refused to divulge the source of information and they had to suffer for it. And because of such suffering, the prestige and self respect of the profession have been very much heightened. No journalist worth his salt would disclose the source of his information, not because he is so anxious to keep his own self respect, but because he knows that it is vital for the profession as a whole. If you want an independent press, if you want your newspapers to play their part in the field of public opinion, if you ask them to disclose the source of their information, then the very spring of independent journalism would be touched, and that is not a desirable thing. The Honorable Minister has himself explained that point, and therefore I need not labor that point any more. I, however, find that clause 14 expressly lays down that the Council has the power of requiring discovery and production of documents. If you call upon a correspondent or the owner of a paper or a publisher, in many cases it would be impossible to withhold the source of information. You cannot withhold the source of information and at the same time discover and produce the documents. We have given notice of an amendment. Even if you want to continue the existing provision, you could provide for an exception saying that the journalists must not be required to disclose the source of information. It is not a question of just the newspaper people and the public being apprehensive over these things. Here is a provision which has been expressly put there. Of course, you can say that eminent journalists will be there on the council and that we can expect the leaders of the newspaper world who can be expected to be elected to this council to pay proper heed to the professional standards, but it will be better if you were to put an express provision in the bill itself. Now, the newspapers reflect political opinion of the country, and there are bound to be sharp differences, and however much we may try, it may not be always possible to keep within the limits. By this provision, you are giving them a handle to force an unwitting journalist or somebody holding a different view to disclose the source of information that is not called for. Coming to the other general powers of the Press Council, it is true, as mentioned by the Honorable Minister himself, that the powers granted to this body are far more and go far beyond the powers granted to the British Press Council in the particular statute. I quite follow that the penal provisions therein have not been called to use, as the minister himself made it clear. It is just a sanction. The body to be created will enable the profession and the industry to regulate themselves. It is some sort of a voluntary thing which is there. A sanction will have its own way, but then there is the power to summon witnesses, and as I have already mentioned, requiring them to produce documents and other things. When you give all these powers, at least some of us feel that in the present set up in our country, these powers are a little excessive. They are not called for in the present conditions existing in our newspaper world. Some of these powers have not been found necessary to be given to the British Press Council even, and yet we are investing our Press Council with such powers. It will be a rather hasty experiment to make in entrusting our Press Council with these things. The question of censure is there. After all, we want our journalists and our newspaper men to voluntarily enforce a conduct and try to improve their standards of journalism, which will always be in their own interest. Stop.